This might be the oldest sport we've ever talked about.
I mean, I imagine the first one is I can beat you to that tree. The second one is when the guy got beat, he grabbed the other guy and they started wrestling.
You talk about curmudgeons. Wrestling fans are some of the worst. There it is. The cymbal clash. It's our entrance music.
That's right. That's right.
There it goes.
That's how we walk in, right?
I think so. Right down that entrance. Do we have pyro?
Yeah.
Do we have the money for pyro for our entrance?
At some point in time. That's right. There's a GoFundMe for our pyro for
We'll drop
Twisted Eras, right?
We'll drop our Venmos.
That's right.
In the description. The second we win, and then we're on our way to World Tag Team Champions, Mr.
Absolutely.
Doug Marsh.
Absolutely.
That's incredible. Well, welcome in. We're already setting it up. An awesome episode of the Twisted Eras podcast here. Rob Stott alongside Doug Marsh, and we're diving into one. It's been kind of shared interests of late. The first couple of episodes of this podcast, but now we get to talk about one that is specifically me that you still got some knowledge about back in your day, right?
I do have a little knowledge, but I also love to hear your stories, man. It's wrestling is just one of those things that's been around for so long. You can go back and watch, from the 40s and 50s. These guys were doing these same crazy things, and it's wild. But I think every kid kind of goes through that, and I think you'll, say you did too, and then as an adult, you come back and go,
hey, wait a second.
This is still pretty good.
It's one of my favorite things about it, because when you specifically look at the sports center, let's call it what it is, right? Sports entertainment, as they like to say.
Yeah.
It very much is, and it gets that knock of being the male soap opera. But honest to God, it's the perfect, and it shouldn't be seen as something that's like degrading to it, because I think that just... soap operas are still around, right? They're still going.
Absolutely.
Longest weekly episodic running programs in TV history. And you got to include, wrestling in that, and we'll stick to that, instead of calling out a single promotion. So
Yep, absolutely.
It's something you can fall out of for a number of years, a decade and a half, if you will, and one day happen to flip it right back on, and it's like you're sliding into that old glove, right?
Brought you back in, right?
And it hasn't let me go ever since. But it's incredible. Yes. It's a unique world, and one that, as we dive into what I'm excited about diving into more so than, a WWE or WWF, whatever you want to call it, for this episode, it's everything else like that I think, I'm kind of excited to share about. Like, wrestling is an entryway to a lot of other things in life that I realized as we were getting ready for this. It's had more of an impact on me than I realized as a person. Because if you're watching the home version or the video version of this, the shirt I got on today is a guy, maybe not, he'd be probably on my Mount Rushmore if I had to pick 4 of wrestlers, of sports entertainers. Mr. Kurt Angle, a guy that... if not for him, I probably don't know that amateur wrestling is a thing. And if you know me, amateur wrestling, like, I got into it because of him. And it's become something where, like, I'm heavily involved in it today still.
Right.
I go and try out for a middle school wrestling team thinking like, oh my God, this is my pathway into, the squared circle and jumping off the top rope and things like that. Lo and behold, I spend 7 years of my life doing it. Through middle school, high school, even a year or two of college, and now coming back to coach it as a high school coach, and my own child now getting onto the mat. So it's a deep thing for me. So it's exciting to be able to talk about it.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that, like, when you say wrestling, you immediately think pro entertainment wrestling, but the actual sport of wrestling has been around forever. Since
the Greeks did it.
Yes,
right?
Since people started going, what? I think let's see who can pin the other guy, or whatever.
And so on their back.
Yeah, so if we go, we love. We've done baseball, we've done football, we've done all these sports, but this sport has been around
This might be
as long as we are.
the oldest sport we've ever talked about, or
It
will ever talk about.
Absolutely. I mean, I imagine the first one is I can beat you to that tree. That's probably the first. The second one is when the guy got beat, he grabbed the other guy and they
Right, and
started
started
wrestling.
pummeling them.
So that's probably two.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
so, so it's
Yeah.
no, but it's an awesome one, and I before we dive into it, I want to give you the chance, like, what's your earliest memory of
So
the sports entertainment version of wrestling?
yeah, so I remember as a kid, it being on. I wasn't a huge wrestling fan, but I got I think it was on 81 Thanksgiving in 81. My aunt, I had you know several cousins, and she was going to take my cousins to this wrestling event that, come to find out, was a yearly thing and a huge thing for Greensboro. But she asked if I wanted to go, and I'm like, yeah, sure. Go hang out with the cousins at some sort of event on Thanksgiving night. This is amazing. And we went, and so that's probably my first,
Yeah.
dive in of wrestling. And it was, I was 8, and it was amazing because it's got, high flying, it's athletic, and you've got the braggadocious,
The
all these sorts of things.
personalities.
Yes, and you got the heels. This was probably my first in, that, like, villains are fun. As an
You could like
8-year-old
the
kid.
bad guy.
Yeah, as an 8-year-old, man, my villain was Darth Vader, and at that point in time, he was not good yet. you know. And here we were, these villains were like, man, they were reveling in the people yelling and screaming and booing and hissing. It was wild as an 8-year-old kid, and so that's my first, and then I started watching it. So it was very regionalized
Yeah.
before
Yeah.
Vince,
Really
grabs
brought
all.
over. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So the regional that we had was the NWA,
Yeah.
and it was the Dusty Rhodes of the world, the Ric Flairs.
Yep.
There was a guy named Magnum TA we loved. The Rock and Roll Express, mid '80s, bleach blonde hair, loved them. The Midnight
Go
Express
figure.
was,
You
yeah.
latch
Oh
on
yeah,
to the
exactly,
rock and roll.
exactly, exactly. And so the Midnight Express was their antagonist. And so you had the Four Horsemen in the
Yeah.
NWA eventually, with Tully Blanchard and the Andersons,
Mhm.
Ole and Arn and Rick. And so that was me. And about, I want to say, 15 or so, what would that be, 88, 89, I stopped. So my wrestling is from 81 to 89. And
Yeah.
you know I do we didn't get the WWE or F or whatever it was back then. What we got were the toys,
Yeah.
and so I knew Mean Gene from the commercials for the toys. And I know I know Hulk Hogan as Thunder Lips in Rocky 3.
Yeah.
As great as
Yeah.
Hulk Hogan will ever be in the ring, Thunder Lips is by far his best
Yeah. That's
performance.
awesome.
It's the most amazing. So yeah, go back and watch Rocky 3 and see Hulk as Thunder Lips.
It's impressive.
Yeah, yeah, but that's my.
Well, the cool thing about wrestling, and specific, so WWE today, they love talking about, ironically, eras, and they've got a lot of them. And that era you're talking about, that's labeled as the golden era. I mean, you think of
Okay.
some of the names, the 80s to early 90s, is you could probably go back further, but the WWF coming around and becoming a company and starting its sort of march to taking over the industry.
Yep.
That's labeled as that golden era of the names that were involved, and some of the
It's like Andre the Giant, right? Hulk
yeah,
Hogan,
Warrior, right?
the Junkyard Dog. Does that
Yeah,
sound right? The Iron Sheik,
yeah,
maybe.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And
So,
like I say, I remember these more for the toys than I do the actual thing, because we only got NWA. We didn't really get the WWF.
right, right,
So
and
that.
well, you get like the families too. So you mentioned Rocky 3 does come out during that era, so that's like the intro to Hulk Hogan being who he is, the
Mhm.
Jesse before he becomes a governor. The
Yes.
body Ventura is
Very
the thing,
flamboyant
you
with
know?
his feathers and all that
Right,
good stuff, right?
absolutely,
Yes,
absolutely.
that's
And
awesome.
then, even what I love too, Jimmy Superfly Snuka. You
Ah,
talk about, some of the
yes.
families that are still around today. Obviously, the McMahon name is one that sticks, and you see the involvement and what that means. But and you mentioned Dusty, Cody Rhodes today, his kid.
Yes.
It has a great opening line for anyone that is a wrestling fan that still watches today. Before his theme music hits, it's got this like just two little bass drum kicks, is like dun dun, and wrestling has more than one royal family, and then it kicks off into his music. It's
Nice.
very like gets the juices flowing, right? But I mean, you got the
That's
Flairs. Rick has Charlotte today.
oh, yeah.
Jimmy, the Anoa'i family. Just the length of history they're still involved. For anyone that doesn't know, that's the Rock's family. All the way from his great grandfather, High Chief Pierre Maivia,
Wow.
down to his dad, to him. He's got a daughter in it now who's in WWE's development. I like all through Roman Reigns is probably a name people might know. So
And
it's just
you
it's
have the,
crazy.
you have the Memphis guys too, right? With,
Yeah, absolutely.
was that the King,
Jerry
Lawler?
Lawler. Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and, I know once again, I know that
TV
through
movies,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
through movies.
Right.
Yes,
Truman
yeah,
Show.
yeah. The Andy Kaufman,
Yeah, Kaufman. Yeah.
yeah, Kaufman coming through there, Man on the Moon. I know the Memphis side of things too, which was you had these massive guys too, and,
Yeah,
it's
it's such a different world today. Because even you mentioned NWA, that has some it takes up some time in the Philly area too. So NWA actually is how the guy's name Gordon, Todd Gordon. I think he's the guy, like one of the founders of it. Um, he expands into Philly, and that's where the first ECW, before it's
ah,
Extreme Championship Wrestling, it's Eastern Championship Wrestling.
gotcha.
And they claim Philly as their territory. This was after too. I think he had sold companies off to Ted Turner, and that's where
Mhm.
WCW comes in as
WCW.
well. And
Yeah.
but he not I think non-competes were a factor in like where and how he developed his territories. But that lo and behold, that's how ECW comes around and becomes a thing in South Philly, in the shadows of the sports arenas down there in South Philly. So not too far away. The building's I think still there. Where they used to have their ECW arena. So it's just, and that's how the culture in this town. You talk about bringing fighting to a town that doesn't need anything else to really get them all riled up. You bring some pro wrestling to Philadelphia, of course it's gonna, find a foothold and um, into what it's become today in this area. Like I don't think, without the culture of wrestling in a town like here, you don't get WrestleMania 40. So,
Right.
like there's a reason why WWE has the markets that it goes to on a regular basis. Yeah, they still go to their small towns. We'll talk about a Greensboro event that I happen to,
Yeah.
stumble upon, but it's those big markets and fan bases that they've been able to develop. And I mean, you can't talk about wrestling without giving some credit to the success of what it's become today, without what McMahon has done to
Ooh.
bring those regions together and have it be this just global sensation and what it's become. And you might have opinions. Everyone has an opinion on him and
Sure.
what he is, who he is, what he's done, the McMahon character, because of
Yeah.
course it is a character as well,
Oh,
beyond
absolutely.
just who he is as a person. But it's incredible. It's exploded so much to what it's become today.
Yeah, and he's East Carolina guy too.
Yeah.
He graduated from ECU. He's a pirate.
It's
So
incredible.
it's yeah, yeah, and it's like sometimes they claim him and sometimes they don't.
Right.
Depends on the
Depending on the report. I don't.
exactly.
I wouldn't claim the mustache version of him today. If you go look at pictures of
Woo!
Vince McMahon today, but
But if yeah, the younger one
the
who
Attitude
really
Era that was willing to get in the ring with Stone Cold on a
yeah.
weekly basis and show off those pythons.
You mentioned as well, the reason the Kurt Angle is because he
Yeah.
he was a real wrestler. Is wrestling season is with basketball season, and we would practice at the same time.
Yep.
And I would basketball practice was tough. I had a coach who was somewhat of a drill sergeant, so we ran really hard.
Yeah.
It was a lot. It was the best shape of my life at 15, 16 years old, whatever. But you would come off of practice, and you were sweaty or whatever, and then the guys would come out of the wrestling room and you're like, yeah, I haven't done anything, man. You guys are incredible. What you
It's
what you would
something.
do to get
There's
yourself in shape, man.
to know what I put myself through, and like I wasn't even, I came into high school as a lightweight. Go big surprise to anyone that knows me, right? I was a soaking wet like 90 pounds as a freshman in high school, so the lightweight 103 was not hard to make. But by senior year, I'm cutting 15, 20 pounds a year to get to 125-pound weight class. As a senior, junior, senior, and it's wild stuff. I don't know what that does to your body, but you look at, my favorite is looking at, there's a great Instagram post. I think UFC had it. Because I mean, it's the world of fighting, wrestling, sports entertainment, it all kind of meshes together. And
Absolutely.
Well, now today with UFC and WWE are part of the same company, this TKO group.
Yep.
You see all that going on. But if you look at pictures of UFC wrestlers or UFC fighters, today versus like when what they looked like 10 years ago, you see all the cauliflower, like they look like wrestlers, right? They got the cauliflower ear. They got, jaws maybe a little wider, a little less hair and all that. So, I mean, there's a lot worse. I don't have cauliflower. That's a good thing. I'm not, wearing these headphones that cover up that. But I wore my headgear.
Yes. There's a reason to wear the headgear. Right? What? Go look at the UFC guys and you'll see why you should have had it on, right?
It's incredible. It's like they have flat cartilage for ears and just little tiny holes for ear holes.
Anyway, you guys, what you guys did, if this is new to you, if you're not a wrestling person either, you have no clue what amateur wrestlers go through to get.
And it's, to be clear, we don't go through steel, tables and chairs and ladders and things like that. So
true.
That's what I learned.
That is true.
There was no jumping and elbows and leg drops.
No, none of that. But making the walls of the room sweat, because it's so humid in there because you've worked so hard. That's incredible. The type of stuff you guys did.
It's fun. And I don't know about it. If I'm sure eventually growing up, you come across it following the Olympics and things like that. But unaware of it until, my introduction to it via Kurt Angle and his gold medals coming down the ramp post his Atlanta, career and winning a gold medal with a broken frickin' neck, as he likes to say.
Well, isn't it wild? Like, he is a true amateur wrestling, but most of these guys,
he's the gateway, right? Vince had an idea. He wanted him. Like, I think he had him earmarked. There's a phenomenon. Like, one of the things I love today and appreciate about wrestling today, especially with like the partnerships with Peacock and things that they've got going there. There is a ton of behind the scenes content, and that's what kind of gets me jazzed up about wrestling today. Is like, yes, I appreciate the athleticism and like but really it's the storytelling, both on screen for like the weekly shows and premium live events and things like that, but also the behind the scenes stuff. Like someone like Adam Copeland, Edge, who just went from WWE to another promotion, AEW, but someone that a decade ago was told he was done, like career over, broke his neck, had similar things to Stone Cold, right? Neck fusion surgery, things like that. Makes a surprise return at a Royal Rumble a couple of years ago after 9 years not in the ring. And like watching the documentary on the day of what it was like to hide him and, everything he did to get back. Like it's those things. And there's a great one on Kurt Angle and everything he went through. I mean, you talk about, and I know we talked about this in the baseball episode, but the steroid era of baseball, wrestling had its own issues and might still. Whether it's steroids or, just the Oxycontin and things like that to mask the pain of what it was like to go out there and Angle wrestle. Like his started before his time in WWE, having to shoot up to get through matches with that broken neck, like breaking it 4 more times, I think, during his career in WWE and being dropped on his head. There's a a pretty popular clip that gets brought up very often of Triple H. His finishing move was the pedigree. So he'd like have you down between his legs, arms up, and drop to his knees and drive your face into the mat. Well, he did that to Angle on top of the announce table.
Oh
And
gosh.
the way he fell, Angle fell straight on his head. And he's like out cold. And you could see Triple H like putting his arm over him, making sure he's okay. Right. And he's like out cold. He doesn't remember a thing, and like carrying him through the rest of that match. So there are just like seeing that
Wow.
sort of stuff and hearing the behind the scenes aspect of it. And like, but
Yeah.
it's wild. And that's kind of what I appreciate about it today.
Yeah.
And
Doesn't your WWE even have like, aren't they even recruiting athletes
they are, and
now?
that's so. Yes, that's where I was going. Thank you for bringing me
Yeah.
around to it. Right, so
Yeah.
he's the gateway, and there's a great story. That's the story about Vince targeting him and his life after the Olympics. He didn't know what he was going to do, and
Yeah.
gets introduced to wrestling. Well, now you look at it today. I mean, after Angle, there was the next biggest name you can think of is Brock Lesnar, NCAA champion, Minnesota. Wrestled at the University of Minnesota. But there's other names. Bobby Lashley was another big guy out who's here right now, wrestles today, but has a amateur wrestling background. There's Chad Gable, who is a guy I honestly, physique wise, he's got me, but like probably around the same size.
Nice.
Amateur wrestler, and like runs this faction called the Alpha Academy. So he's like training people. So, right.
Wow.
There's a tag team, that just recently debuted called the Creed Brothers. They have amateur wrestling backgrounds. There are so many names. Shelton Benjamin, another guy that I think he came in. Angle had a little stable himself for a little bit there with a couple other wrestlers, and I believe Shelton Benjamin was one of them. But a guy amateur wrestling background. Gable Steveson, probably the most recent name for anyone that follows collegiate wrestling. 3-time NCAA champion. He's like still in the early phases of transitioning. He's not sure. He can't give it up. Like he doesn't want to. He left his shoes on the mat. That's like the way you retire as a wrestler.
Nice.
He
Yeah.
left his shoes in the middle of the mat after his last NCAA championship. But not sure he's done elsewhere, like on the world stage. So he's still, competing, but also training to be a wrestler. He made an appearance at, WrestleMania. I think I don't know if it was last year or the year before, but he's made it known he's signed. They've got these next in line, and NCAA has its name, image, likeness. Well,
Yeah.
WWE has its next in line program where they've
Gotcha.
got these athletes. The Cavenders, like, so not amateur wrestlers, but the Cavender twins, Haley and Hannah, I think are their names. They got famous as Miami college basketball players. So
Yes.
the twins, they're
Yes.
signed to these deals.
Yeah.
Right. So like they made an appearance on a show not long ago. So there are so many different ways to get into the sport, but like awesome to see amateur wrestling have more of an impact. And there's guys too, like there's another name. I'm throwing names out here left and right, but Dolph Ziggler, a guy that has an amateur wrestling background and brings it into matches as well. Not with the company anymore, but like to watch them sort of like mix it up and throw those elements of real, I say real, but real wrestling with pro wrestling. And it's just cool. And it makes it neat to see the sport get tied that way. And I have no problem calling it a sport myself, but it's crazy.
There's definitely aspects of sport to it.
Oh, absolutely.
There's no question about it that they're athletes and they're incredible athletes, and it's almost a dance what they do.
It's
to be able
it is
to
choreographed and scripted.
And granted, like you say, occasionally somebody gets hurt, but the majority of the time, these guys are out there every night in some small town doing exactly the same thing they do for you on TV, and they just—it's amazing the choreography and the dance.
We got your early memory. I got to throw mine out there because it does. There's kind of two intros for me. I recall as a young boy, probably in the early 90s. I think it was 93. If I had to pick a specific year, but it's Lex Luger body slamming Yokozuna. I specifically remember watching it. It was on TV. Well, if it's 93, I'm 5 at the time, 5 or 6. And it's outdoors. I remember watching it because it was outdoors, or I don't know if it was being covered, but like Lex had this very American, he was Mr. America,
Yeah.
and I know Vince, especially around, you
Oh,
kind of
go for it.
right around July 4th, he gets
Yeah.
into this America versus
Ah.
that's why Sheik is so famous for being the foreigner coming into the
Yeah.
pro company, and someone from some Captain America has to stand up and
Ah.
defeat the foreign enemy. So Yokozuna being a Japanese, competitor, also part of that Rocky family, by the way. So he's
Yeah.
related through cousins and that Anoa'i family, but Lex coming in and defeating Yokozuna. That's my first memory of wrestling and
Wow.
being like a fan of one individual. But then it doesn't really hold on until probably one of the darker eras of the company, and that's Owen Hart falling from the
Mm.
rafters at Over the Edge pay-per-view back in the late '90s. So I didn't watch it. I too young at that point to ask
Yeah.
parents to pay for pay-per-views, but I remember hearing about it because it made such big news. It was a huge moment in the company, and
Mm.
obviously got a lot of coverage out of it for how it was handled, and the show went on. Despite all that, which, like, hindsight, what are you going to do in an arena full of that many people, and you're not sure, you think you're sure, but the situation was what it was. But lo and anyway, the next night they have a memorial show for him. That's the first show I remember watching.
Gotcha.
Was the night after, and all the the ceremony for that, and kind of the things that were done to remember him and honor him and that sort of stuff. But that's where it picks up for me, and I
Wow.
go on like a good 7-year stretch just about of watching the programming, and coming right in the middle of that, again, another era, the Attitude Era, probably the most famous era of probably most important era in wrestling history for WWE anyway. It's when you get Bret the Hitman Hart, and Shawn
Okay.
Michaels comes around, Triple H becomes a name, The Rock becomes a name, Stone Cold becomes a name,
Whew.
and that's and we'll get to it at the end about favorite periods of wrestling, but
Yeah.
that's probably one of the more important that I can think of.
Well, even as a lay person who doesn't know much about wrestling, every single one of those names was massive, even in
And I didn't say the Undertaker either, right? Like, he's part of that, right?
yes.
So
Yes. You have these guys crossed from wrestling into
yeah,
be it advertising, be it movies, be it what other entertainment, we all know The Rock, just because,
yeah,
and he starts off the same way. Um, we also like the fact that The Rock was a college football player too,
heck yeah,
and you can see,
the
you
U
know,
baby.
yeah, and it was amazing when they pulled out footage of him playing. You know, uh, it's just so cool to see, where they come from, that sort of stuff. It was
Heck yeah, they
awesome.
loved him in
Yeah,
that. I know every year around the draft,
yeah.
WWE likes to put out
Ah,
posts of their players that attempted to play in the
yes.
NFL. Him being one of them. Obviously, never drafted, undrafted.
Yeah,
But you got again, a guy like Brock Lesnar played in the preseason for the Minnesota Vikings.
nice.
Roman Reigns suited up for the Minnesota Vikings. If you want to call him a pro wrestler, Pat McAfee, right?
Did he really?
He spent some time. He did commentary and had a couple matches. But
Which
obviously an
makes
Indianapolis
perfect
Colt.
sense because that's he is
He's the
built for that.
personality. He's the absolute like the prime type of personality that they're looking for.
Oh,
A guy
it's
that has a
unreal.
following, that can pull in a different audience and do what he's doing and do it well. But
Yeah.
he actually roomed with someone in college, Baron Corbin, or I don't know if it was college or during the training camps. But Baron Corbin, a guy that he spent some time with the Colts as well before getting cut, and that was
Hmm.
they had a I think it was SummerSlam this past year. They had an angle where uh, Pat and Baron wrestled each other, and it all
Wow.
started over his jealousy, of being cut from the team and Pat making it and being this big thing, and you're just a goddamn putter. like,
Oh my gosh.
just bring in real life. That's the best when they
Oh
can
my
bring those
goodness.
real life elements into the story and tell it, and that was just cool to see. But there's so many examples of
Oh, absolutely. You could go
yeah,
through. Doesn't Shaquille get around into
Hell
some,
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
everybody like wants to be a
Right.
part
Logan
of
Paul right now,
yeah,
he's the
yeah, it's
current U.S. title holder,
like we
right?
just want to be a part here. We want to, this is so
Snoop
cool.
Dogg dropped the people's elbow on Mike the Miz at WrestleMania. So,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
there's just I'm sure you'll see some Philly stars come out. I am sure I would put money on it that Kevin Hart makes an appearance, especially if they can get The
Ah.
Rock to make an appearance at the show. In Philly in April. So that wouldn't surprise me the least, knowing the connection there. But no, that's it really leans into when they call it sports entertainment. They really lean into that entertainment aspect and do a phenomenal job of making sure to find new ways and unique ways to captivate an audience and
Yeah, but
attract a new audience.
absolutely. And it's really what is it? The two things. You can be a great athlete and not be able to talk, and you're
Right.
never going to make it. Or
Oh
you
yeah.
can talk and not be a great athlete, you're never going to make it. You have to have both sets of skills
Yeah.
because if you're,
If you're
if
not
you're
good on a
the
microphone, you can
no shot,
there's and there are so many examples of one or the other.
hmm
Right? It's the person that can find the balance of being a good in-ring performer. And this is where, it becomes, I think, I start to appreciate that storytelling aspect more
hmm
because Stone Cold has a great podcast that he, releases episodes around the premium events for
hmm
wrestling. But they get into that storytelling and matches being their own script, and they have a beginning, middle, and an end to how they're constructed. So you start to, when you watch whoever he's talking with, dissect a match and the story that's told. Like there's the in-ring story that's being told, but then also the story on the microphone week to week
right.
to captivate that audience and get them interested in what you're doing. And you don't have to be a main eventer to do that. And there's fans will let you know. And I think one of the most important things that they ever discuss in that setting, whether it's his podcast or elsewhere, is the worst thing you can hear when you come out of the behind the curtain is nothing. So,
Nothing.
right? It's the audience doesn't care. Like they're not going to
Yeah.
react to you. And there's
Wow.
it,
Yeah.
I love to bring back Kurt Angle. He had a tough time, when he initially came back. There was like, okay, well, let's get behind him, and then all of a sudden, for whatever reason, fans turned and they started booing him.
Ooh.
And his song is like the old Olympic, like he brought in some, Olympic sounding music was his
Yeah.
entrance music, and it was like it would have the beat and then it would pause, and at the pauses fans would start chanting "You suck." So, right? So like that's how he came out every time, and like it bothered him at first, but then it clicked for him. Like they care. Like they're not
Yeah.
going to respond unless they care. And the fact that they do that, like okay, something's resonating. And if it's that I'm a heel, I got to put on that bad guy face. Lean into it and do it. And now it's like it became one of those things where anytime he's around, they still do it. Like the "you suck," but it's like he appreciates it, and like
Yeah.
it's an endearing thing to say "you suck" because he gets that they care.
They care. Yeah.
Right?
It definitely I could see how that would upset you
Yeah.
that's to begin with, but once you embrace the fact that okay, we're good with this,
Right.
they do care and you go with it and imagine I always thought, see, like the analyst in me, the technical aspect of all those sorts of things are what fascinates me.
Yeah.
It's like, when you watch a documentary on wrestling that's pretty open, you'll get, okay, yeah, well, this was what we were supposed to do, and this is how we did it. And, that is fascinating to me
Yeah.
to go, hey, we're going to get a 20-minute match here. This needs to happen, this needs to happen, this needs to happen. And then we're going to turn it off and it needs to go. And you're
Mm-hmm.
like,
Okay.
wow,
Yeah.
man,
And
this is
how they get through that. Like they'll have, key moments throughout that they know, spots, they'll call them,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
That they got to hit. And just how they do it too. Like
Yeah.
if you pay close enough attention, and this is like one of the questions I wanted to ask, and
Yeah.
but we'll dive into that in a second. But you could tell throughout, like there's moments where they have the box in box to show a replay, but if you follow like what's still going on live, they'll be like covering their mouth like this, and you know,
It's a signal, right?
talking
Yeah.
through. They've got the referee who's got the microphone in the ear that, you know, they have to act like they're checking on them when they're down, like, oh, are you okay? Like, are you okay to continue, that sort of thing. But really, they might be relaying a message that they're getting in their ear.
Right.
So there's a lot of like nuance to how an actual match happens too. That's kind of
Ah,
fun to follow as well. But
that is
you know,
amazing.
it's that again. It comes back down to that. It's entertainment. Did you ever, or do you recall the feeling that you had when you found out wrestling was fake?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to go back to the first one I went to. Like I say, it was in '81, and I this is going on memories that are 40 years old, and I remember bits and pieces of it. But I am pretty sure that that match ended with Flair's bleeding.
Yeah,
You
always.
know?
It always does.
Yeah.
That bleach
Yeah.
blonde hair with red,
Yes,
the
exactly.
crimson is just.
And so when they would say, "Well, it's fake," I always went back to that point. I'm like,
But he's bleeding.
"But he's bleeding. Tell him it's fake." You know?
Yeah.
I was like, so I get the fact, there's like this, no, it's not fake, and I think fake is the wrong
Yeah.
word. It's staged,
Yes.
which is completely different than fake, because I don't believe there was anything fake about the blood that was coming out of his forehead
Right.
from this cage. Was it staged that this was going to happen? Absolutely,
And he
but
might have,
he
preempted it with a little bit
he
of a
could he
razor.
it could have
you know?
preempted, yes.
But
But how crazy is that? There ain't nothing
right.
fake about
No.
that,
No.
and so that's where I
It's
even as a kid, you're
it's
like,
kind
oh
of
no,
it's kind of one of those things. It's like, and hopefully no kids are listening to this, but it's like Santa, right?
yeah,
It's like Santa, it's the Easter bunny. It's like you realize the screen, the curtain, you see Oz behind the curtain.
yeah,
Right? And you learn that, like, oh, the kicks aren't really making those loud smacks. That's really their
right,
hand hitting their thigh as the foot gets near the face. Like, oh,
yeah,
like you
but
you learn some of the tricks, but at the same time,
yes,
like, they really went through that table,
they
right?
did, and I want to say I'm from the South, and we had motorcycles were a big deal when I was a kid. I had a
Yeah.
motorcycle for a while, and I ended up selling it, and I bought a trampoline. And this trampoline was amazing because you could do all sorts of cool stuff, but
You
wrestling
do
was one
flips
of
and
them.
suplexes as
Yeah,
well.
exactly. And I can remember, Ric Flair, who that's my era. That's the guy. He was the main guy in WA. With his finishing move was the figure four
Yeah.
leg lock.
Yeah.
And we would watch to see how he did it. And when you actually put somebody in it, it
It hurts.
legitimately
Sure.
hurts.
Right.
And so
Same
you
with
would be like,
I feel like I almost broke my neighbor's brother's back doing a Boston crab once. So,
exactly.
like you can't,
Yeah.
the walls of Jericho, whatever you want to call it, right? You can't take
Yeah.
two legs, fold them in half, and like they're,
No.
they're the
So
iconic shot, I think, is Bret Hart having Stone Cold in it during, it wasn't WrestleMania. I think it was like Survivor Series. They had uh an I Quit match, and Stone Cold doesn't have any, like, he no submission moves. He was a heavy
right,
hitter, and there's
right.
just the iconic shot of him, Brett having him in the Boston Crab, or sharpshooter
Yeah.
because that was his move, and just blood pouring down Austin's face, and he's like pressing up away from the mat, and like ends up passing out from the pain, right?
Yeah.
But there's a way that they do it that it doesn't hurt. That if you don't know,
Yes.
and you actually put someone in that move, you might break their back.
It's legit. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
those
And
holds
now,
hurt.
my favorite of the trampoline was the suplex,
Yeah.
because on a mat I could see where this would
Oh,
hurt.
yeah.
On the trampoline, it just looked
No,
cool.
you bounce,
It,
bounce
it
right back
just
up.
bounced right off. It was amazing.
Oh, that's great.
But yeah, I loved it. That was and so fake is tough because yeah,
I specifically asked you that question too because
mhm,
I have the same thought, but I needed to
yeah,
hear someone that
yeah,
spends less time with the spectacle of it, answering
once
it that
again,
way.
I can just remember as a kid, and I was like, I don't think this was fake blood. Maybe who knows? But anyway, that was my always
Yeah.
thing as a kid. I was
And
like, it sure didn't look fake that night when he came out with his bleach blonde hair that was covered in red.
it's real athleticism too. I mean, you see some of the
Absolutely.
spots that they hit. Guys like, for anyone a fan today, there's this guy named Ricochet. That in-ring name Ricochet. He's called the highlight of the night. is kind of his other. They have nicknames for their nicknames, but he's known for doing like 450 shooting star presses off the top rope, or springboarding backwards off the rope out of the ring onto a crowd of people. So like that takes athleticism and coordination, and I mean it's a mixture of acting and gymnastics
And
and like what
dance.
the and
Yeah,
dance and what they do, and it is just to an extreme degree, and it's incredible to
absolutely.
watch, and the
So
spectacle is real, that's for sure.
I I think you're I think you're misinformed if you call it fake. You can absolutely call it staged,
Mhm.
you know, but there's nothing fake about
No.
what they're doing.
I love, as a it's going to sound so egotistical saying this, but as a more mature fan today than like a child, a kid watching, um, I get to appreciate it more, and that's awesome. But also the kind of the period we live in today with social media, and anyone that knows this word, there's these things called dirt sheets. As a newspaper person, you may understand kind of what that means, but the what that's done to wrestling, that's like the other side of it. What I'm not a fan of is like watching, you know, these upstarts and established companies even that try to cover wrestling, um, and they do it in a way that they try to you know do like get scoops on what's going to happen and break the
Uh,
story before the
uh,
rumor mill. They feed the rumor mill, if you will. um, and it just creates one, you kind of lose the aura of the big surprise. Like, they still
mhm.
happen. um, it, Over the last calendar year in WWE, there's been some big returns. One most recently that was reported on, CM Punk, a guy that left the company, has this infamous pipe bomb promo, they call it, where he sat on the stage with John Cena having just gone through a table in the ring, lost the match, and he comes out. He's leaving the company. It's known that he's leaving the company, and he has the title. He's like, I intend on leaving with the title, but he goes off like on wrestling. It's a shoot thing where he's saying it because it's part of the gimmick, right?
Sure.
Got to go off, but also it's again one of those things where it's baked in reality. So like you don't know, is it really, or does he mean the things he's saying, right? Um, so he left, went to took like 7-8 years off wrestling, comes back for the other promotion, Cody Rhodes started a couple of years ago, ends up debuting for them, gets in a couple backstage real life scuffles, but like you don't hear about those if there's not for these dirt sheets and like the
Right.
reporting that goes on behind the scenes. So like now his kind of reputation is getting tarnished. Gets in another fight backstage a couple months ago, fired by the company. Things that are going to be, I guess, reported on, but like you've got the scoop finders, the beat reporters, if you
Yeah.
will, trying to get in there, get the angle of what's going on, tell the story. He ends up debuting back in WWE, a company that, like, I think both sides a couple months ago would have been like, hell has to freeze over for this to happen.
Yeah.
It, door opens, he ends up being able to debut in his hometown of Chicago, a return that should never have happened. But like you see all the rumors and fans on social media that pick one side or the other. Like, I don't want his ass back in WWE. He's a cancer to the locker room. You're not
Right.
in that locker room.
You
Like,
don't
you don't
know.
know what's going on. And then you get the camps where it's like someone's more of a fan of one promotion over the other. Like, they won't even watch the other thing because they're such a WWE fan that
Hmm.
it like it's created such a culture around the audience of wrestling that it almost destroys being a fan of wrestling. like there's such you talk about curmudgeons.
There they are.
Wrestling fans are some of the worst. you know And it's tough to watch that happen. And I guess you could kind of say that happens to anything, right? But it's just, and that's where I get into the like, guys, it's entertainment. You're supposed to just be entertained by it. Like, don't try to ruin the entertainment by, you know, trying to predict the product. Like, enjoy
Right.
it, right? Like,
Exactly.
enjoy what's coming and be surprised. Like,
Yeah.
if you find out, it ruins the surprise for those. Like, there's ways to avoid it, I'm sure, right? I could not follow them, but like, the algorithms feed this stuff to me all the time. so,
Absolutely.
so it's impossible to miss. But
Yeah.
like, it ruins it in that regard, if that makes
It's
sense.
almost like the whole the Star Wars chasers back when the new episodes were coming out and you would get these
Spoilers.
spoilers.
Right. The
Yeah.
spoiler alerts.
It is like, I don't want to know this. I want to watch it on the screen.
Right. Let me
Yeah.
be entertained.
That's
I don't need
interesting.
you trying to predict, who's going to return or what
Right.
over the last 2 years, people are like predicting the next 3 WrestleMania cards. Like who's going to be the main event? Like Roman Reigns versus who? Who's going to win the Royal Rumble? Like, there's sports betting on the Royal Rumble.
Are they
And like,
really?
that's what gets me. And well, the WWE's kind of at fault for this too because they have a partnership with DraftKings. So
Oh, okay.
I don't know how that could happen
Woo!
because there are results written down somewhere,
Somewhere.
or they're known in someone's head, right? Like who's a good friend of Triple H, the
Oh, yeah.
chief creative officer, chief content officer for WWE.
Yeah.
That could go place those bets.
And if you're the 20th person in the Royal Rumble and you ain't making much out of this deal, but I know who wins.
Right. you could go place a bet. So, it's just it's such a different vibe around it today. But I don't know. It's kind of balanced out from the fact that I have that appreciation for how it is as a thing and like enjoying the entertainment and the storytelling and all that other behind the scenes. So it's got its pros and cons. There's a lot of wrestling today has so much good, but also so much evil.
Yeah.
which is kind of what it's always been about, right?
But at the end of the day, they're trying to ruin it, but the product is still good.
Yeah.
It's the outside stuff that quit trying to ruin this for me because the product is still good. Yeah, right. It seems like that's a lot of things in our world today.
Yeah.
I think the NFL struggles with this as well. The NFL's on almost every day now, and you're kind of like, you get to the point where I don't care anymore. I don't even know who's playing. I don't, you watch on Sunday. I like Sunday. I like it on Sunday.
Yeah.
But because the product is still good, but they do little things to.
Yeah.
Well, they're trying to ruin it.
The No Fun League it's a great example, right?
Yeah. So you mentioned something interesting, and I'll throw it back at you. Mine will be completely different because it'll be old. But yeah, who is your Mount Rushmore of your favorite wrestlers?
Yeah. Well, I gave you one. So I'm wearing the shirt for him, and it's solely because of the impact that he has on my life, whether he knows it or not. I go even deeper. I go wrestle at Duquesne University and get to wrestle Clarion, where he went.
Wow.
So we hosted like a tri-meet, I think. It's like us, Pitt, and Clarion or something like that.
That's amazing.
And, I know that's where Kurt Angle goes to school and, his collegiate career happens. So that he's on there for sure. The others, I mean, it's got to be Stone Cold, just because that was growing up in the day. He was the guy. I think he means more. Probably should be if you rank all time wrestlers, and I know there's a lot of great ones. WWE, WWF doesn't get to where it is without Stone Cold and kind of what he did for the company. He's up there. I think an absolute number one. And then it's like, who's next? So Austin, Angle, The Rock, for everything he's done. And what's insane about those two specifically, like The Rock's had a few returns over the years, but you talk about extended runs and full time in the company. Austin's career, 97 to 02, 03. It's 5 years.
Wow.
It's 5 or 6 years. Like that. Now, again, to be fair, his last match was WrestleMania 19. No one knew it at the time. But he had a real bad health scare, a real life health scare, in the ring before the match, or not in the ring, but like in the hotel. Like he almost didn't make the match because of some things that
Gotcha.
happened in the week leading up. The only people that knew were him and The Rock, who wrestled him in that match. So there's a great moment between those two at the end. Rock pins him. It's the first time he pins Stone Cold out of 3. He's 2-1 against him in WrestleManias, and that's his first win.
Wow.
WrestleMania 19 in Seattle, and there's a great moment between them. He pins him, rolls over, gives him like a hug on the mat, and like you could see him whispering in his ear, like I love, they talk
Yeah.
about it, like I love you, I appreciate you, best of luck, and kind of what's to come, and then off they go, and you don't see Stone Cold for 19 years in a wrestling match. He makes appearances, don't get me wrong, like he stays around,
Yeah.
is connected, but has a surprise match at WrestleMania 39 or 38 rather in Dallas when it's at AT&T Stadium, and he makes no appearances on any show in the run up. But he gets called out by this guy, Kevin Owens, who's like just bad mouthing Texas and making fun. And like, Austin's music comes on and everyone thinks, oh my God, Stone Cold's here at a Raw right before WrestleMania. And it's him with like a bald cap on.
Oh my
He
God.
comes out pretending to be Stone Cold. And then he's like, they love doing these shows. Well, they used to do them back in the day, right? But like the talk shows on wrestling, where it's like they always kind of digress into just an absolute beatdown of someone. Like it starts as just an interview, but then the fighting happens. So he invites him to be part of the Kevin Owens show at WrestleMania, and Austin comes down. It's first time back, and he challenges him on the show to a match. So he's like, let's do it right now. A Falls Count Anywhere. And they do a 15-minute, like, everywhere. They go up the ramp. They're like, Austin's riding him on an ATV up the ramp and, like, doing suplexes on the ramp. But no, just incredible what he's meant to everything. So he's there. The Rock's there for sure. Everything he's done, even in his brief full-time, career to what it is today, and still anytime he makes an appearance, it's like 100 million, social impressions, things like that. A number 4, man, it's a tough one. I got my top 3 easy.
Yeah.
4, it's a hard one. I think you have to put Undertaker on there, and just everything he's meant to the sport as well. The most prolonged, career, 30-year career, 3 decades of the Undertaker. Some of the most impressive moments, I think of him throwing, Mick Foley off of the cage, off of the Hell in a Cell and through a table.
Yeah.
Just the returns, the WrestleMania streak, going undefeated, and just what that character is. You talk about some just phenomenal characters over the years. There's not one that has more relevance or just impact on that company, I think, than the Undertaker.
Wow.
So I think that's my 4.
Okay. No, that's awesome. My 4 will be completely different because of why they would mean anything to me.
Yeah.
So obviously the Rocky 3 is one of my favorite movies ever. So Hulk Hogan as Thunder Lips, it's just genius. And then he would go on to all these great things, but it's got to be one for me. As we'll dive further into these podcasts, we'll learn I'm very much a movie guy. And so the second one is a movie as well, which is one of the, I don't think I've ever heard anybody say anything negative about The Princess Bride. It's just like almost the perfect movie. And Andre the Giant is just iconic in this role. And so, I mean, it's got to be number 2. Once again, number 3 is, you talked about Vince and how he really transformed this company, but part of it was merchandising. He let video games go, and he did all these things. And there is a cartoon in the mid 80s.
Yeah.
I think it's Hulk Hogan and Friends or something like that. And so I'm right around that, 12 years old, probably, edging out of cartoons, but it's about wrestling, and Roddy Piper is in there. And
yeah. Great.
Roddy Piper is in the card in 1981 when I went to that Greensboro Thanksgiving show.
That's awesome.
So that, Hot Rod, man, that's got to be number 3 for me. And then North Carolina, there is no other than Ric Flair.
Right.
He was hated even as a kid. You hated him. But like
there's There's a
You had to
great
go
Instagram account of no context Ric Flair memes. Like that's the name of the account. It's just
it's
no context Ric
amazing.
Flair memes, and it's got some incredible content of
I
just like
believe it.
him, him shouting "woo," like showing up with the boys at 3 a.m. ready to tear the
Yes.
place down. Like what is, and
Oh,
then him going off.
it's unreal, you know. But like you watched when I in the 80s, he is the main reason you watched, you know. You wanted to see Dusty beat him up, or you
Yeah.
wanted, you know, to see
Jet
him
flying, limousine
oh,
riding, wheeling dealing, son of a gun.
Rolex wearing.
Woo!
I mean, so that, you know, just
Oh,
the whole Charlotte aspect, and you know, he's he's not from North Carolina. I think he's a Midwestern guy,
well, they
maybe
they own it
Minnesota
though.
or something like there. But
Like he owns it.
yeah,
And his family does because I mean Charlotte Flair,
hmm
her whole shtick and a nickname for her is the Queen, right?
yeah, there
Queen,
you go.
Queen City,
Yeah, yeah,
tying right back into what Charlotte is, and
yeah.
it's
That's that's
it's cool.
awesome.
Yeah.
So
So
anyway, that's, you know, mine are much more entertainment based with Hogan and Andre and Hot Rod and Ric Flair, but that would probably be my four.
and we haven't even really talked about today, like what it is, a little bit about the behind the scenes, right? And the social media and the media coverage of it. But,
Yeah,
I don't get back into it if not for a global pandemic. Isn't that weird?
so
Like
it is very
it's,
weird. You know, in other episodes, you're going to find out there are other things that got us we got back into because of the pandemic, but this was yours.
yeah.
You got back into wrestling because they could sequester themselves on
Right.
a
So, obviously WrestleMania being the marquee event, and there's a couple, I mentioned there's like a 15-year gap. There's
yeah
like an event or two. I'm at Duquesne, the Consol Energy Center, which was the Mellon Arena prior to the
yeah
Consol Energy Center being built, right across the street from campus. There's an Armageddon event in like 2008 or 9 in Pittsburgh. I go to that. I don't remember it. I'm hammered. I'll just be completely frank. We like shotgun beers in the bathroom in the dorms and walked over to the arena and went. So like I remember being there for that. I could look up the card and
yeah
talk to. I wouldn't remember a damn thing. I just remember that I was there. But I go to that and stay vaguely connected. I bet you that was a great card too. So, we should go look at that. But
absolutely.
it's I don't really follow it. Like I have my own wrestling career going on.
hmm
Just a lot of life things going on. Early career, not much happening. Only to find out that come the world shutting down, that WrestleMania has to go dark, right? They had this big event planned for Tampa Bay. It was going to be at Raymond James Stadium. The outdoors. They've been doing this whole outdoor thing for a number of years now, and they got to cancel it. And they're not going to cancel it though. They're gonna bring it in house to the WWE Performance Center, which is where, by the way, they do the NXT events, which is their like development camp, and
Is that Orlando?
it's in Orlando. So they basically bring their talent in, and they say, hey, we're gonna stay here. This is how it's gonna be, and you know it was such a unique thing to watch a WrestleMania with no fans. Like you saw, we talked about it earlier, right? Like as a wrestler, the worst thing you can hear is no reaction whatsoever, and they have to go into a setting where they're not wrestling in front of anyone except coworkers and like empty seats. So there's, and again, another thing, we mentioned the different eras. This is the COVID era. They had a stretch of about a year and a half where, from that WrestleMania up until the first event back was the following year WrestleMania. It was the first time they did it. They made up for it by going, outdoors and doing a WrestleMania at Raymond James Stadium, and they have fans there, but it's like not a full crowd. And even after that, they go back to this Thunderdome, they called it. So
Underdome.
after having the Performance Center for a while, they realized they needed to do something. So they developed this like they did it at the Amway Center, and they did it at another college campus when they had to move it around. But they
hmm
basically wrapped the ring with TV screens, and they built up like what looked like people, in the
Ah,
stands, right? But it
yeah.
was Zoom screens. It was like they piped fans in, and they piped noise in, and all that sort of stuff. But it looked like they were in a full arena, but it was Zoom. It was very COVIDy.
Wow.
So like they had to do that. But watching that weekend, and they got to do some really cool things too. I mean, you talk about the opportunity to really get creative with what you were doing. They had the ring, and there were matches in the ring. Drew McIntyre, a guy who had been fired, won the Royal Rumble that year in front of fans. I think that was either at the Trop or they did it in Phoenix. I forget where that Royal Rumble was, but a guy who was like really on the upswing. And it's actually something. It's part of his storyline now that I'll get to in a second. But he wins the Royal Rumble, goes and beats Brock Lesnar in like a 6-minute match for his first world title with the company. Had to do it in front of no one. So like his thing now is like I've never been able to win the world title, and he hasn't since in front of fans. So like he's gone
Wow.
heel now and like pissed off because like every chance he's gotten, he's been screwed out of it. So he's never
Hmm.
had his WrestleMania moment in front of fans. Um,
Wow.
but they were able to do these like cinematic matches. Undertaker's last match is a cinematic match where it's a buried alive match. Something that they've done in the past in arenas where like
Hmm.
it was Undertaker. I think he wrestled Austin in one, where they have like a giant pile of dirt at the top of the ramp, and you got in a grave dug in it, right? You got to throw your
Wow.
opponent in and bury him. Well, he has a buried alive match against this guy AJ Styles, and I mean it's incredible. AJ, they do it in a graveyard and they film it at a grave site, right? And they have a
Wow.
grave buried, and so AJ shows up in a car, and then all of a sudden you see Undertaker, who had like this whole American badass vibe, where he was riding bikes and things. Like
Yes.
drives up to the graveyard on a motorcycle, like it just they do a
Wow.
match and record it like out in a graveyard. So and he ends up winning. But like they have a couple examples of that too, right? Just John Cena does one where like they walk through his past. He wrestled this guy, the Fiend, Bray Wyatt, who recently passed away. Um, you know, so just they do this whole cinematic thing. Like it was so captivating. um, and unique to watch. And that right there, I got my free Peacock trial during the like it was like a 7-day period. I did it right before, the first night of
Hmm.
WrestleMania. And they also split it into 2 nights. So you had 2 nights of WrestleMania, and that's something that they've hung on to. They're doing 2 nights of WrestleMania. They've done it ever since, even for the live events now, with fans back. They're doing 2 nights of it. But you know, haven't canceled the subscription yet. so so they've got me.
Yeah.
And it's a different thing. And I mean, going to events, we work together, company based out in Winston Salem, and it happened to be the one time I come down there is when a Raw happens to be in Greensboro.
Yeah.
And I I tried to get people to come. No one had any interest. It's okay. But I sat there. I small town, the benefits of being in a small town, I'm able to find like $100 second seat off of the entrance ramp for a Raw, like,
Yeah.
and just watching all these like big names walk by. It was incredible. Been to there was an Extreme Rules pay-per-view at in Philly, last year, where Bray Wyatt actually makes his return to the company. He had been out for a while, got released, and came back for his last run before passing. But and now it's a WrestleMania. So
Got a big one
the
coming. Yeah,
big
the
the
big one
big
coming
Super
up.
Bowl in Philly. Actually, so that Extreme Rules that I was at, that's where they unveiled the logo that they've been using for Philly with the Liberty Bell and the words WrestleMania in Eagles green. Is just it's cool to see, and it's
Yeah.
been so awesome to be. I'll gladly take any heat for being like a cheesy wrestling fan. Like, you watch that shit? Yes, I do, and I'm proud of it. We got to do our favorite era. I think we
Yeah.
gotta get to
Well,
that.
absolutely. We'll end it on a favorite era, and because I really only have the one. It's that era of the '80s of, as you call it, the golden era.
Yeah,
I went back, the match I went to in '81. Let me get these names out here. Uh, when you went to the event in Greensboro, you had no idea, but Greensboro had hosted Thanksgiving wrestling for years, and these were some big events. The event in '81 had the Thanksgiving cage match with Ole Anderson versus Ric Flair. Like I say, Flair won. There's a news article with it. I don't know where this is from, but it took Flair 26 minutes to defeat Ole Anderson with a pile driver in the highlight match at the
Wow.
Coliseum on Thanksgiving night. What was wild here is a crowd of 15,136 attended, which was the largest ever to see a wrestling program in the Greensboro
Wow.
Coliseum.
That's crazy.
So yeah,
What do you
so
know?
that was the night I saw. They had a special one night tournament as well that the winner won a Cadillac car. And these names are Ricky the Dragon Steamboat and Roddy Piper and Chief Wahoo McDaniel and Ivan Koloff and
Man.
Sergeant Bob Slaughter. And this is amazing, but that was my one
Wow.
wrestling event, and it's one of those that you jokingly say, I wish it was on video somewhere because I would love to go back and see this because this is some wild names before they were
Yeah, that's incredible.
huge.
Well,
Yeah.
now that you're running through cards too, I'm looking back. I found it.
Yes. Where's your
I found the
yes.
2009 the long lost Armageddon or
Yes.
2007 rather. I don't even remember the year. How about that? So it was a good one, and it actually had some of the Mount Rushmore on there too. So
nice.
the main event was Edge versus Batista and the Undertaker in a triple threat match for the world title, which Edge would win and become a new world champion at that point. So Batista, who is now known for his work in the the Guardians of the Galaxy.
I just know him through that. I did not even know this was a wrestler. My father-in-law, who is now in his mid to upper 70s, he still loves it too. And same deal. He would go in and out, but he does still love his wrestling, and he loves Dave. And it was like no clue this was a wrestler, and sure enough,
He
how
lets
great
you
is
know.
that? Yeah.
That's awesome. But an undercard that included Chris Jericho defeating Randy Orton by another family, wrestling family. Randy Orton being a third gen, wrestler, defeating him by disqualification for the WWE Championship. Jeff Hardy versus Triple H, which was Jeff beat Triple H to become the #1 contender for the WWE Championship at the Royal Rumble.
Wow.
Shawn Michaels was at this pay-per-view.
Okay.
Wrestled Mr. Kennedy, beat him in a singles match. Big Daddy V and Mark Henry beat CM Punk and Kane in a tag team match.
Okay.
So there was some stuff. Beth Phoenix, Edge's wife, Adam Copeland's wife, Beth Phoenix, defeated Mickie James for the World Women's Championship. And Rey Mysterio beat MVP by a countout, which means he didn't take the title. MVP held the title. You can't take a title. It can't change hands via DQ or countout. For the
countout is when you don't get back in the ring. Is that what that is?
Count of 10. Yep.
Yeah.
So, and then I saw a dark match that included Jesse and Festus. Couldn't tell you who they were today. Beating John Morrison and The Miz. So.
Oh wow!
Hilarious.
Is that The Miz who would go on to be like
Mike The Miz from the reality TV, the Real World, right?
Yeah,
the guy that he's only known because of the Real World, but a guy today, 20-year career, and is what they call a 2-time Grand Slam champion. So he's held every title in WWE twice.
Wow!
So he's a guy that you wouldn't expect it, right? He's not like the build of a wrestler.
No.
Or like a Vince McMahon guy, if you will, but he's had a career that's been successful for a sustained period of time.
Done well for himself. Well,
sure has.
What's your era?
It's so before we get to my era, I do want to share some of the other names because like I said, there are a lot, right? So you got the golden era that you kind of grew up in.
Yeah.
New gen era. That'd be like the coming of age of the Bret Harts and the Owen Harts, the Shawn Michaels, 93 to 97. So early to late 90s. Austin makes his debut during then. Triple H makes his debut during then. The Rock actually comes around, debuts at a Survivor Series during that time. It's also when I think WCW starts to come around. They really make their hay in like 98, 99, which would be the heart of the Attitude Era. That's an Attitude Era being 97 to 02. And that's also when you see the invasion. So Vince buys WCW. It's an incredible storyline of all of a sudden one night on the Monday Night Wars was probably something people remember that watched during then, when Raw went up against WCW Nitro in the ratings. And, obviously WWE wins. We know the results of that war. Vince buys the company behind the scenes, but they don't make that part of the story. All you know is one night they're simulcasting WCW and Raw, and Shane McMahon shows up on WCW and says, "Hey, guess what, Dad? I bought it." so now they start bringing all the athletes over, the superstars over to WWE, and that's when you see like Chris Jericho comes over prior to the purchase, but he jumps ship, and Chris Benoit and Eddie Guerrero, those guys start coming over to WWE, and they make that invasion. So that's an era. Then you got John Cena labeled this one because he comes out and actually challenges Kurt Angle. He walks into the ring before he's got this whole the rapper gimmick that he does and wearing the jorts and everything. And Angle asks him, he's like, "Kid, what do you think? What's it that you have that you think makes you able to stand in this ring with me?" And he just gets on the mic, yells in his face, "Ruthless aggression." So for 6 years, they have this ruthless aggression era. So nice. It's got that label. And then WWE ends up, it gets a primetime spot on network television. So, Fox, they have to go PG. Yeah. And, no more blood, no more.
That's right.
So they've got about 6 years of the PG era.
That's right.
They're still kind of in it. I think they went back to a 13, PG-13, something like that, or whatever it might be. Today they've been with Vince out now. They're trying to kind of get back to more of that edginess, if you will. But you don't see blood unless it's real.
Unless somebody gets hit, accidentally almost, okay.
You don't see all that, but then you got the reality era of like social media becoming a thing. They try to weave in all of this new age stuff, right? In like the mid 2010s, the 20-teens, the new era. It's when like a lot of the new talent, the women's revolution happens during that period.
Yeah.
Women's wrestling during that Attitude Era was like an absolute joke. If you go back and look at it, Trish Stratus and Lita might not agree with you, but you've got things like Jello matches happening and
oh my gosh,
bra and panties matches, right?
What in the world?
You only win by ripping your opponent's clothes off. So stuff you would not see today, right? so
wow.
But, you get to the new era, and that's when, women's wrestling takes a turn, and you see Charlotte Flair show up. And they've got the 4 horsewomen that come into
nice.
WWE. Her, Bayley, Becky Lynch, and Sasha Banks. 4 women that really revolutionized. They have their first all-women's pay-per-view during that period, 16 to 21. And then you hit the COVID era. So that's the lockdown and everything coming out of that. And I think that there's no name for now. But I if there's anything, it's got to be like the TKO. That's the name of the company that now owns WWE.
Yeah.
The combined WWE UFC company.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Is it the TKO era or
TKO era? Yeah.
The post Vince era, post McMahon era. But it's
post Vince is probably going to be what it's called because he had such a control for so long.
Yeah, and people are still not convinced that he's not completely out. So it's like one of those things. Do you really believe? But a move like CM Punk coming back to the company, when Vince was so over it, that's kind of I think a mark of this. It's a new era. So,
interesting.
But running through all of those, it's if my Mount Rushmore doesn't tell you, it's that Attitude Era. Attitude. That is the height of wrestling for me.
Yeah.
And not to say that today isn't good. Like I wouldn't be watching it if it wasn't.
Right. Right.
But there is so much that happens during that period of time. I mean, Degeneration X. You had kids going around yelling "suck it" in the middle of class, doing the crotch chops, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was such a movement
Yeah.
in so many ways, and the Austin and Vince rivalry and what that meant. I have a cassette, a VHS tape of that rivalry. WWE sold all kinds of stuff, right?
Sure.
Games, whatever. They have the home tapes.
Yeah.
The tape of that rivalry and like Austin showing up in a nurse's uniform to bash Vince's ankle when he's on a hospital bed with a wet pan, like that kind of stuff. Pulling the IVs out of his arms, right?
Oh.
It was just so iconic. Driving down to the ring on the Zambonis, spraying
Yeah.
beer into the ring.
Yeah.
I just so much awesomeness and just
Yeah.
attitude, if you will.
He did.
That era is what stands out to me, and
Yeah.
there was nothing like it.
No, and even you mentioned it, like it was like on almost every night too. They had some sort of
Yeah.
show. It was so huge,
It's things they don't
You
like. It's that way today, but it was. They had Sunday Night Heat was a thing, Monday Night Raw. Then they
Mhm.
moved. I think that SmackDown debuted during that period. It wasn't a show prior to that, but I think if I remember, they used to tape it on Tuesdays because I went to one. I went to
Mhm.
a taping, so it was so cool. You knew it was going to happen before it aired on TV. So they taped it on Tuesdays, and then I think it aired on Thursdays.
Yeah.
And then they had like Saturday, some episodic stuff on Saturdays. They did like a New York thing. I remember for a little bit, like filming like Subway wrestling or something like that. It was
Sure.
just weird.
It was wild, especially when you think about my era, which was Saturday at noon,
Yeah.
and then I think they would rebroadcast it Sunday morning, which was typically I would see it on Sunday. Played a lot of sports when we were
Yeah.
kids, so we weren't around that much on Saturday afternoons. But on Sunday mornings, they would rebroadcast, 10 a.m. or so, and so we would get to see, that's when we watched it, and so to go
Oh,
for where it's just all the
yeah.
time, you know.
Now today, it's not too different. They got Monday Night Raw. They've got NXT that's on TV on Tuesdays. Friday Night SmackDown, and then pay-per-views. They've actually, I feel like it's got to be to not compete with Sunday Night Football. They moved back, and I bet you that as well. They probably, some of those 2-night WrestleManias, they do a little A/B testing, if you will, right? You get to see which night
Yes.
performs better during
Yeah.
those stretches, and so the one-night pay-per-views have all been on Saturdays of late. To kind of move to a different night of the week, and I will say it's nice to have that and then still have your Sunday to not have to stay up late and then go right to work the next day. But
Absolutely.
also not to compete with football.
Yeah,
But
which you can't do.
yeah, it's yeah. And then they've got like streaming shows as well. They've got a program called Main Event. They used to do a Lucha Libre, which is like Mexican Rey Mysterio wrestling.
Okay.
They used to have a show for that streams. But there's all kinds of, and then the other promotions as well. AEW being that All Elite Wrestling. They've got 2 programs a week, Rampage and Dynamite, and then a show they do Collision. So it's all over the place.
If I'm not mistaken, granted I'm not the wrestling connoisseur as you are, but isn't the NWA still around? Didn't somebody buy the name NWA?
So if you go back to ECW, that was like
Uh-huh.
the owner of it. It existed. WWE purchased it. So during
Okay.
the whole invasion angle during the Attitude Era,
Mhm.
WWE buys WCW. They also buy ECW, which would have brought NWA/ECW into the WWE portfolio. It made a
Gotcha.
comeback. So it kind of disappeared.
Okay.
And then in the mid 2000s, it comes back in like 06, I think.
Okay.
Or maybe somewhere around there. And it has another run. Like WWE stands it up again as ECW, and they had the ECW championship, and they were doing ECW events, and but it has since like gone. It's
Gotcha.
defunct. But NWA as itself, that's
Yeah, I was trying to think because it I know Billy Corgan got into something with it. He wanted to purchase the name,
Right.
but and the only reason I knew that was because both a Smashing Pumpkins fan and I grew up watching NWA. But I imagine COVID probably had detriments to a lot of your local
Yeah, for sure.
smaller wrestling organizations, seeing as you could not even go to the high school gyms to do anything. But 'cause we do still, I do,
So it is. So there's NWA All Access subscriptions on like Fight TV. So, that was the thing. They tried to get so the CW is where like that's what the part of the Peacock network and everything with like NXT and or USA is what I'm thinking. But I think so looking here, there's a little Wikipedia
Mhm.
research.
Yeah,
CW had recently signed with WWE November 7th. So as we're sitting
okay,
here, not too long ago, planning to air NXT programming starting October 2024,
okay,
which actually was a decision that the CW ended up picking WWE over NWA
wow,
for some programming that was supposed to be happening. So it does sound like I don't know who owns it today. Um, you mentioned the name,
yeah, Billy Corgan.
yeah. So he still around trying to do things.
Is he
Matt
really? That's
Kennedy,
wild.
Billy Trask. So yeah, they've got some things happening, but not to the extent. And there's more indie scene, right? Is what
Yeah, oh,
people like to say. So
absolutely.
it's like more of that level at this point, I guess. So
Interesting.
the name is still out there. Look at that,
How about that? Um,
unbelievable, man. What a world! What a
yeah.
way to dive into it. I know that I have some thoughts on it and experience with it and knowledge of it, but to
Mhm.
sit here and talk about it, whoo,
Yeah, it's
what
wild.
a whirlwind!
Yep, absolutely. It's been wild. We got to talk a little amateur real wrestling. We got to talk pro wrestling. We got to talk pro wrestling cartoons, and
We
yeah,
didn't
it's been pretty wild.
it didn't even touch on the video games and the
Yeah,
soundtracks. Like I used to, oh my gosh, I remember bumping on my way to wrestling practice or school in the afternoons, or they used to sell CDs of the theme songs.
they
So,
absolutely did.
so,
Never forget. I was a huge Our Lady Peace fan.
oh,
It was a modern rock band out of Canada in the mid '90s, and their first album's amazing. My wife and I still listen to these today. And then randomly, I heard this really rocking song from them. Now, they rocked on some stuff, but I was like, man, that is like really
yeah,
rocking.
what's going on here?
Come to find out, it was written as a wrestling song, and it was used. I don't know the person who used it, but let me see if I can find so
Well,
you can
it's
go,
such
oh,
a right. Well, it's such an underappreciated aspect. I think of it. Like people,
it
you know,
says Chris
Chris
Benoit.
Benoit. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, the
Yeah,
song
well,
was called Whatever.
yeah. So,
And
oh,
and it's so funny. I guarantee there are people who think, yeah, that's
ba-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na,
it. And they had
ba-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na.
that's the
Yeah,
song,
yeah.
To
It
me,
becomes so much a part of who you are.
it's just another Our Lady Peace song, and
Well,
then come to find out it was a theme
s-
song for a wrestler.
so just how important music is to the wrestlers as well. Cody Rhodes founds that other company, AEW,
Hmm.
comes back to WWE in 2022. The WrestleMania in Dallas, and um, makes a surprise. It was much again one of those much speculated things, but it turns out part of his negotiation. So he left having done this whole Stardust character, which was in line with his brother Dustin Rhodes, who was Goldust. They paired them up and had a thing, and it didn't work. So he left, went indie, refound himself, and really leaned into nicknames. You grew up with him. What was Dusty's nickname?
American Dream.
So Cody refound himself as the American Nightmare.
Ooh.
So that's his kind of thing now. He's got this. He gets made fun of it all the time, but he's got this logo tattooed to his neck that it's like a skeleton head. It's got it's American flag colors and everything, and
Uh-huh.
that's his thing. But his music was written by this band Downstate.
Mhm.
and it's very personal to him if you listen to the lyrics. And I don't want to get sued, so I won't drop music over top of this, but we'll put it in the description for you to go listen to. And um,
Nice.
part of his negotiation to come back was like, hey, this is my character, this is who I am. I have to have the music come with me, and
Mhm.
that's how much he cares about it. So like that, there's WWE, everything's like, rights and who owns what, and like
Sure.
the company owns many of the names. So that's why when you see like an Edge in
Ah,
WWE go and leave and has to debut as Adam Copeland in the other company, it's because WWE owns the name Edge.
wow.
So
Gotcha.
the
That makes
Undertaker, you're
sense.
never going to see another The Undertaker anywhere. Um,
Man.
so it's rights agreements and who has to get the contract signed, like to get the music to come over. Um, because that's how important it is to some of these guys. So that's right. The music is such an we could talk about that on another episode of just how
Absolutely.
deep those connections are to the wrestlers and the people and what it means. So
Yeah. Well, you mentioned it. We'll close on this is like you need 2 notes or so and you know who it is
yeah,
coming out. And
yeah,
2 notes and the
right.
crowd just
Glass
yeah,
shattering. You know who it is, right?
you just
It's
you hear
just
these 2 notes and you're like, "Oh, it's so and so." And that's power right there.
yeah, it's incredible. Well, some phenomenal eras of this industry, this sports entertainment's world. But let us know yours too. If you're still with us at this
Absolutely.
point, we'd love to hear your feedback on what your favorite era of wrestling is, what your thoughts are on it in general. Let
Yeah,
us
your
know. And
your favorite I love the whole aspect of the favorite wrestling intro music
yeah,
too.
right. Favorite music. What's your Mount Rushmore? So
Yes.
who's on yours?
Yes. Yes.
Um,
So let
yeah,
us know.
yeah, we appreciate it. And hey, keep it twisted.